Hello. So today we're going to talk about detachment from the ego and how that can impact on your self-esteem. A mate of mine, we'll call him Jay, who's been following me on the Street Fight Secrets channel for a long time, wrote me a message and said in one of your videos on SFS, you said how one of the best things you could do for self-protection is to not walk around with such a bloated ego that other people can prick so easily. So in terms of self-defense, if a lot of fights really, like I always say, what fills up the accident and emergency units on a Friday and Saturday night, and what police have to fill most of their crime reports out for assault is ego. Usually, most of the time it's ego based. So if you diminish your ego, then you're less likely to get into fights. Then in the podcast with the seduction guys, you said how many people get into martial arts training because they fear having to be assertive. That was the podcast I did with Jordan Harbinger of The Art of Charm, which is worth a listen if you're interested. If I do say so myself. Sam Vaknin was also interviewed on The Art of Charm on the Jordan Harbinger podcast, and that's a good one too. So Jay asks, I kind of find he's on more Zen type material at the moment, and he says, I kind of find that if I concentrate on letting go of the ego in a Zen way, my self-esteem drops. For the past 2 months, I've been doing it, and I started to get a bit of a, oh no, I'm insignificant feeling. Is this something you could address? I know I'm insignificant in the big scheme of things, but I find that whilst letting go of the attachment to the ego, status, etc., it makes total sense, it also screws with my self-esteem. That's not great, because that means your self-esteem is rooted in your status. So your sense of self-esteem is a funny one. The ego is a funny one. Detachment from the ego is a funny one. Now when I say they're funny, they're not funny, ha ha. They can all be a bit of a red herring, like the concept of happiness. You know how it's well known this now, but it caused a bit of a stir when it first came out because it was so counterintuitive an idea. People started saying if you go straight for happiness, you'll never hit it. Happiness is kind of a byproduct of doing what you want to do. Slavoj Žižek has a nice little clip on the Big Think channel that is titled Why Be Happy When You Can Be Interesting? And it's one of those things where if you go for it too directly, it doesn't seem to work. Self-esteem can be this bit of a red herring because it's very hard to define, and actually self-esteem is usually, I think, the byproduct of doing things for others. Richard Bandler was the first person, I know I'm doing a lot of hyperlinking here, but Richard Bandler was the first person I ever heard suggest that, which was self-esteem doesn't really have meaning, and if you want to feel better about yourself, just do something nice, like help an old lady cross the road. You know, if you see an old guy struggling with his shopping, then go over and help him. You know, do something nice for people and contribute freely and give of yourself freely, and you tend to feel good about yourself. Because the unconscious seems to operate in a way where it's like observing you like a second person, like another person, and then gives you feelings and instincts to do stuff based on what you do. So if the unconscious observes you behaving like a loser, then it goes, oh, we are a loser, now we will feel bad. And if the unconscious observes you behaving like you're a winner, like you're doing stuff that is likely to lead to you being happy, fulfilled, successful, then you start to feel good, you start to feel motivated. So self-esteem is a dodgy one, can be a bit of a red herring. And then you've got this letting go of attachment to the ego. Well, which ego are we talking about here? I mean, in the Zen tradition, that's all rooted in the East, but the word ego is Greek, I think. Let me just double check that. And it refers to the self. So I think I'm right in saying this, via our model of current linguistics, it was Freud who started talking about the ego first and popularized it, and he wasn't using it in the derogatory sense that those coming from an Eastern philosophical template are. Okay, the word ego, it's a Latin and Greek word meaning I. Now when Freud used it, he meant that it was like, it's your way of interacting with reality, and it's your individualized sense of self. To hyperlink again, Terence McKenna said you need your ego so that you put the food into your mouth, not into the other person's. So you can't always be boundary dissolved. You can't function in the world. If I have no ego, Terence McKenna was using it as a funny example, but if I have no sense of self, what is to stop me whilst eating to just not put the food in my mouth, but to put it in yours? Because we are now one. So you are fed, we are fed, it is done. And then I would, it's a silly example, but it's a nice comic book way of very clearly thinking about it. So ego is necessary. Ego is a Western word in Latin. It would be rooted in Latin and Greek philosophy. When Freud was using it, he was like, if you have an underdeveloped ego, or an ego that has been corrupted or perverted in some way, then you will have problems. So the ego in the Western template is a good thing. Now, the word for ego in Sanskrit is ahamkara. Ahamkara. Hello. Did you know that most of the European languages are rooted in Sanskrit? So ahamkara is a Sanskrit term that is related to the ego and egoism. So now we've got a problem of translation. There's a whole series of videos I'm planning on doing that are about religious texts, particularly the Bible, the Christian Bible, where there are words that are translated from the multiple languages that the Bible is written in that have actually screwed things up. So we're using words out of context where they shouldn't be used. Ahamkara is a Sanskrit term that is the identification or attachment of one's ego. But that one word, ahamkara, gets translated to ego in English. So do you see the problem? What they're actually saying is, okay, let's back up, let's calm down. I got a bit of sweat on with my excitement there. When you read a Zen text, when you read a piece of philosophy from the East, which will be rooted, Zen is rooted in Hinduism. Buddhism is a branch of Hinduism. It's like, Christ was born a Jew, well, the Buddha was born a Hindu. So it's all rooted in Hinduism. It's very, very old, 3,000-year-old Vedic philosophy, where aham, the ahamkara, aham refers to the concept of the self, and kara refers to the concept of any created thing or to do. So when the East says ego, implicit in that is two concepts, the ego and the attachment to it. So when they say detach from the ego, they're saying detach from ahamkara, which sounds great in a Scouse accent. Ahamkara, what you need to do, lads, is you need to detach from your attachment to the self. So it's not the self. So it's not the ego. They don't say destroy the ego, because if you destroy the ego, we can destroy your ego. We'll just give you a small incision in the prefrontal lobes and use you as a hat stand, because you won't have a sense of self anymore. That's actually very easy to do. It's called a lobotomy. A frontal lobotomy is the destruction of the ego. You will have no sense of self anymore. So that's really easy to do. If that solved all your problems, you could probably do it at home. Just take a chisel and just bang it with a hammer and I've got no ego left. You need your ego. You need it to survive, but if it's dirty or corrupt, then it gets messed up. So ahamkara, aham is the ego, is the self. Kara is the attachment, because it means any created thing or to do. So there's a verb, there's self, and then there's something. There's like, let's call it masturbation. So ahamkara in the Eastern philosophy means ego masturbation, but that gets translated as let go of ego. But what it actually says is let go of ego masturbation. So be careful if you start following any path that you... okay, back it up again, Richie, you're getting excited. I might have had too much coffee today, I'm not sure. You've got to be very careful as Westerners when we take on Eastern philosophy, because it is not developed by us. It is not... appropriate to our cultural template. I can say that having lived in Asia for 2 years. In some ways, we vastly over-exaggerate the differences between East and West. But in other ways, we vastly underestimate it. For one thing, you've got to remember, culture here is very old. India is very, very old. China is very, very old. England is very, very new. America, even newer than... Americans look at England and go, oh, it's ancient, you have buildings and castles that are like 800 years old. Indians look at that and laugh. Cambodians would look at that and laugh. Oh, 800 years old. It's old, old, old. So there's much more, just the weight of history is here. And some people say that they can feel it. Like if you come to a country like Malaysia, some people will say they feel the weight of the country in the air. I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's easy for the mind to get impressed, and I try to stay away from impressions like that if I can, because it screws with my critical thinking. But for all Westerners, I would say really immersion in Zen is a bad idea. Now, I started out in the Zen tradition, and it did help me in some ways, but it can also... I was discussing this with a client just yesterday. She's a good therapist and has a good background in spirituality, and particularly in Buddhism. She didn't go the Zen route, which was the one I went because of martial arts. In martial arts, they tend to give you Zen because it was the preferred school of philosophy of the people who were promoting the martial way, the samurai. And also there is a similar thing in China, which is the root of the Zen tradition. It's it's like a soldier's way of doing spirituality. So it's very assertive, it's very stripped, and it's very about the moment and your ability to take action decisively with one thought and one thought only. So again, is it really appropriate for, middle class, housewives or bankers or accountants or, whatever? Probably not. It's not designed for you. The system is context specific. As time has gone by, and as I went through my process of being a martial arts instructor and developing my own martial arts system that was rooted in psychology, by the end I came to the conclusion that everything is context specific. So alone, if we just take the context of the language here, we can deconstruct how this desire to be detached from the ego can be a little bit of a mistake. I'm rambling here a little bit, sorry about that. So I would say be very, very skeptical with all Eastern tradition material, and anybody who's feeding it to you. Make sure they really understand what they're doing. Be very skeptical of anything that encourages you to just let go of the ego. But one more thing I noticed here, mate, and this applies for everybody, is if by detaching from your sense of self and your status, you mentioned particularly, that your self-esteem goes down, then that suggests your self-esteem is rooted in external things. So hereby I go back around the houses and I'm going to sound like your typical, there's a gale force wind that has picked up in the last 2 minutes of me talking. A storm it's gone from bright blue skies to a storm. Now things are falling over. My goodness me, this is exciting. I'm gonna have to wrap this up because that wind noise is gonna get annoying. If you're really, really attached to your status and your material things out there in the world, then yes, you are gonna, and your self-esteem goes down, then yeah, you're probably over-attached to that stuff. Your value, sir, and your value to anybody else watching this is not rooted in your status. It shouldn't just be rooted in who you are. It needs to, I know that this is going to sound like sophistry really and almost a platitude, it does need to come from within. So if by going, oh, I'll let go of my status, my external story, who I am, and you actually start to feel bad, then I would suggest maybe you should do something else to raise your self-esteem, and it will probably be rooted in contribution. The one main sickness of Western society is an excessive and neurotic adherence to a philosophy of individualism, which can make you very, very sick. We are tribal beings, we do need each other, and if we don't feel like we're giving, the self-esteem will go down. I think I'm literally going to have to go around and close the windows because this storm is a nice little tropical storm has blown in as I'm slagging off Eastern spirituality. The spirits of Malaysia are punishment. I wasn't slagging it off, I was saying that we don't understand the proper thing. The word is ahamkara, and it translates not as ego, but as ego wanking. Okay guys, I think that's enough for that. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. I'll speak to you again soon.